Alright, welcome back. So in this lecture we're going to go ahead and set up the drag and drop from our inventory to our hotbar, and from our hotbar to another hotbar slot, and then also from our hotbar back to our inventory. So the first thing that we need to go ahead and do is if we open up our BP first person character, we have this item drag and drop, this on slot drop on server. And what you're going to notice is we have this select. And so we need to go ahead and modify this section of our code. And basically we want to get our BPC hotbar, and we want to hook this up for the player hotbar. Now what you're going to see is we have this player hotbar object reference not compatible. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and select this and delete this. And then we're going to get this error here. That's totally fine. Let's take this target container and do a select. And for this return value, we'll hook it up to this target. And so now if we hover over this, you should see BPC items container object reference, rather than this BPC player inventory object reference. So now we should be able to hook up our player inventory and our player hotbar here. Because this is a BPC items container reference, which is the master class of both the inventory and the hotbar. So I want to do the same thing, delete this, and just copy this node and hook this up for the from container to the index, hook up the player inventory, and copy this player hotbar component, hook that up for the player hotbar, like so. Okay, so this event gets called when we do the on drop inside of our widget, which then calls this on slot drop inside of our items container class. So the on slot drop calls this handle slot drop, which this function is overridden in the subclass of our containers. So if we go to our inventory and open up our player hotbar, what we need to do is we need to override the handle slot drop, okay? So we have the same functions that we need to override are the ones that we did in our player inventory. So we have this handle slot drop. So we need to go ahead and set up these same sort of things, the same sort of functions inside of our hotbar here. So the very first thing that we need to override is our handle slot drop. So in our player hotbar, we'll click the override and do our handle slot drop. And so for here, we can delete the parent handle slot drop because we're setting this up in the child rather than in the parent. Our from container will promote this to a local variable and name this local from container. Our from index will promote that to a local variable, name that local from index. And then our dropped index, promote that to a local variable, name that local dropped index. And then get our local from container, get container type. And then we want to do a switch on e container type. And so the function that we want to call is the transfer item function, which is inside our items container. So we already set up this function when we set up drag and drop from our inventory. So the neat thing about this is that we don't have to do a whole ton of work. We can just reuse the same functions that we already set up. So right click, do our transfer item function. And from our inventory, we can hook that up, and same for our hotbar. And our target will be our local from container. Our to component will be self. Compile, save that. And then our to specific index. This will be our local dropped index. In our item index to transfer, this will be our local from index. Okay. Then off of here, we'll just do a return. So just compile, save that. Then the next function that we need to override in our player hotbar is our add item to index. So for our add item to index, we're going to do the same thing that we do in our player inventory. This controller from character. In fact, we could probably just go ahead and copy all of this and go into our player hotbar and paste it here. And then we can hook up our get controller from character. For this get item at index, we want to get it at our local specific index, and then hook up our local specific index to the index to update the item slot, and hook up the execution pin. Make sure that this success boolean is hooked up to the success after this add item to index. Okay, so we have our add item to index. The last thing we want to do is override our remove item at index. And so we'll do the same thing that we did inside of our player inventory. So let's go ahead and copy. So we just need to reset the item slot when we remove that item. So basically it's just removing or resetting the UI back to the default. So go ahead and select this. And in our hotbar, we can go ahead and paste this and hook this up. For the index, we hook up the index like so. And compile, save that. So we have our handle on slot drop, add item to index, remove item at index. The last thing that we need to do is, right now, in our handle on slot drop, we have our hotbar to inventory and our hotbar to hotbar. But what we also need to set up is our inventory to hotbar. So you have all the different combinations. You can drag an item from your hotbar to your hotbar, from your hotbar to your inventory, and then you have from your inventory to your hotbar. So in our player inventory, we have this handle on slot drop. And I believe all we need to do to set up this hotbar is hook up this into the transfer item. Okay. So basically, this will set up the drag and drop from our player inventory to our hotbar. Okay. Let's go ahead and test this out. Now, if we go ahead and add an item to our hotbar, you're going to see that we're getting like this weird bug where just nothing is working. It's the UI is all white and the dragging and dropping isn't working properly. And so if we backtrack a little bit and go into our widgets, inventory widgets, inventory slot. If we go into the graph here, into our on drop, basically what we're doing here is we're doing this on slot drop on server, and we're getting this container type inside of this inventory slot. Okay, so the default container type is set to player inventory, and we don't even change this depending on the container. So what I mean by that is we need to open up this W item container grid, and in the graph, when we create these W inventory slots, we want to set that container type. That way the item or the inventory slot, the item slot, knows which container it's in. Okay? Because right now, if we just do the drop, it basically thinks it's only in the player inventory. So inside of the item container grid, what we want to do is off of here, do a set container type. And we can go ahead and hook this at the very end. You want to set the container type to the container type of this item container grid, okay? Because basically in our inventory here, we have this items container grid for our inventory, and we set this to our player inventory, okay? So that's how this container grid knows which container it is. Same with our hotbar. This items container grid here, we set that to our player hotbar, okay? So that's how our container grid knows which container it's in. But our inventory slot doesn't know which container the inventory slot is in until we've added this set container type, okay? Otherwise, when we do this on slot drop on server, inside of the inventory slot, we're getting this container type, and that the default is just player inventory. So we fixed that little bug there. Now if we go ahead and hit play, we can add an item to our hotbar, and now we can drag it from any slot in our hotbar. We can drag it into our inventory, and we can drag it back onto our hotbar, okay? And again, we have that little bug where our little drag visual doesn't have the quantity, so we'll have to fix that. Now another bug is if I equip this hatchet, I can drag this item and we still have our hatchet equipped, okay? So what we want to do is we want to make it so that when I drag this hatchet away from our hotbar, we want it to de-equip the item, okay? So in our first person character, we have these de-equip item events, and what we want to add down here is, if we expand this a little bit, we want to right click, add custom event, and name this de-equip current item, and set this to run on server. So basically we're just going to do a check and see if the item that we removed is equal to the item that we currently have equipped, okay? So add an input here of the type integer, and that will be named index. Compile, save. So we want to check and see if this index is equal to our equipped index, and then do a branch. So if it is true, we want to get our third person equipped item and convert this to a validated get. And so if this item is the item that we currently have equipped, we want to just double check and see if this third person item is valid. If so, we want to do a destroy actor so we can actually delete it. And then we want to call this de-equip weapon third person, so that will reset our animation back to the default pose. So de-equip weapon third person. And then we also want to call our de-equip weapon first person, that way we can get rid of that first person model. So do de-equip weapon first person. So now all we have to do is call this event inside of our BPC player hotbar, right inside our remove item at index, okay? So here at the very end, we just want to get owner, and then off of here do our get survival character reference interface message. And now we can call that de-equip current item, And for the index, we'll use this remove item at index and hook that up for the return value. So now we can go ahead and test this out. So I can click R on my keyboard, and I can equip my hatchet. And if I drag this to my inventory, you see that it de-equips my hatchet. I can drag it to my one slot and re-equip it. I can also drag it to a different slot, and I will de-equip it. I can press 3, and now that's equipped, okay? So now we have our inventory drag and drop to our hotbar, as well as our hotbar drag and drop all the way back to our inventory. So as you can see, it's actually really easy to implement drag and drop once you have all the base functions down, because we've already set up those things like the transfer item functions, and so it's a lot easier to set up the drag and drop, because really all we needed to do was override these 3 functions and add, the update UI functions and these specific functions for, de-equipping a hotbar item. Okay, so that is it for this chapter. So in our next chapter, we're going to be creating the rest of our harvesting system. So we're going to create, all the different trees that we're going to use, all the different destructible meshes for them. We're also going to be creating the rocks and the bushes that we can harvest, as well as our pickaxe class. And then we're going to add a advanced harvesting resource calculation that will basically calculate how many resources we should get depending on, what tool we're using, the tier of the tool. So if it's like a stone, iron, whatever tier of the tool is, and also, the server rates. So, you could have like a double XP server rate or just a 1x server rate. So depending on all those variables, we'll calculate how much resources should you get per swing when you either chop down a tree or a rock, okay? So with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next chapter.